So we will now be looking at the different parts of a river, the headwaters or upper reaches. You will see I often use the word upper reaches rather than headwaters, not that there's any difference. And then we're going to look at the middle reaches and the lower reaches. And remember that in each of these parts of the river, there are specific streams of specific sizes. Now, the headwaters or upper reaches encompasses first, second, and third order streams, and these streams are all on the high-lying parts, the mountainous parts. This is now of a traditional, normal river. As I said, there are a few exceptions, but we are looking more at the traditional ones. So these are all still somewhere on the mountain, but as you get to the third order streams, you're now really getting to the lower foothills of the mountain. So you will see on the next slide, I have a lot of information concerning the headwaters or upper reaches, but instead of just going through it one by one, I'm going to refer to the photographs because it's easier for you then to relate to what I'm saying. So if you look at these photographs, especially these first two, you can see, because these are some of the very high-lying ones, the smaller first order streams, you can see that the water is very fast flowing, a lot of rapids. It's a very, very narrow little streams and very often waterfalls. Now, many of you will know what I'm talking about in winter when you are driving somewhere along a road and there's a mountain on the side, you look and you see a beautiful waterfall. So these waterfalls are part of these little streams. Sometimes massive waterfalls, sometimes just small little ones like here. But this is part of the little streams. Okay, the other thing that you see is obviously the volume would be quite low if we compare it with the other parts of the river that we haven't done yet, but I could just mention to you that you have much lower water volume. This is because these are your smaller streams. As you get lower down in the river, obviously the streams get bigger and bigger because they collect more and more water from all the different streams. So the volume is much less. Also, when you compare in terms of the clarity of the water, it's a lot clearer because there aren't a lot of chemicals in the water, and I'm not just talking about pollution chemicals. In natural circumstances as well, there aren't a lot of nutrients, there aren't a lot of solutes, dissolved substances in the water. The water is also a lot cooler than the rest of the river, and this is of course because it's in the mountain. These are this is the start of the river system, and these short little streams, because they are so fast flowing, the water doesn't have a lot of time of getting exposed to sunlight. So they are much cooler than when you get lower down in a river. They also have a lot more oxygen. Now, if you think about it, the water is cooler, and for those who know anything about chemistry will know that cooler water means higher oxygen content. The moment you heat up water, you get lower oxygen content. So much higher oxygen content here. There's another very important reason for that. If you look at the bed of the stream, the river bed of the stream, you'll see a lot of rocks. It's very, very rocky. You can't really see it here, but there are rocks at the bottom there. It's a bit less, but you can see it. So this water travels over those rocks and creates these little rapids, and in some large rivers, quite large rapids. And with this water tumbling down like that, it actually takes up a lot of oxygen. So the oxygen, oxygen in the air gets mixed with the water. If you think about it, if you have 2 glasses of water, and the one glass you just put there and in the kitchen, and you just leave it, you don't touch that water. But the other one, you regularly stir the water. After a day, measure the amount of water, concentration the concentration of oxygen in the water, and I guarantee you, the one where you've stirred the water, there's going to be a lot higher concentration of oxygen in, because you have stirred in air. Whereas the other one that just stood there, that oxygen, you either going to get the same amount or less, because the oxygen has actually, or some of the water is evaporated. So the churning of the water, this constant movement of the water, increases the amount of oxygen. Okay, now what else can we see here? So let us go to those 2 very important processes that I talked about, photosynthesis and decomposition. Let's look at photosynthesis. What do we think would happen here with photosynthesis? Now, one of the things that you'll note here is that for most of these streams, there's quite a lot of vegetation on the banks of the streams, but nothing really in the water. So you don't have any floating vegetation, that sort of thing. I can guarantee you that you also don't have a lot of phytoplankton or other microorganisms that can photosynthesize. And the reason for that is that this is really not ideal conditions for them. The water is too fast flowing, even though you can't see it, it's just flowing quite fast here. You can't have microorganisms surviving properly here. So there's not a lot happening. There is some phytoplankton that does some photosynthesis. There's not nothing here, but it is quite low in the water. If it wasn't for the trees and vegetation on the side, on the banks of the streams, then this part of the of the river, these streams would not actually be able to sustain any type of food chains, because they wouldn't have any source of energy and nutrients. So where their energy comes from and nutrients, it comes from these trees, the vegetation, mostly on the outside, on the banks. So the energy and a lot of the nutrients is actually transported into the river. This happens by means of leaves that are maybe too old and they fall into the river. That's very often the case. Or branches. There you can see it's actually a trunk that's fallen over the stream, and there would be branches that fall into the stream. So those are the sorts of things that get used as food in this stream, and you'll see what I mean just now. Other things that can get into the stream and can be a source of energy and nutrients would be animal feces, animal wastes. It could also be anything that washes in via the rain, so any type of material, organic material that is on the bank of the river, on the ground, or maybe on the leaves that rains into the river, washes into the river. So any situation like that. But the point is that there's not really much photosynthesis inside the stream. So they are not really a self-generating energy stream. And because of that, we call it an allochthonous stream. You'll see the name on the next slide, allochthonous system. It means that the energy and nutrients transported, especially the energy, is transported into the stream. It's not generated here, it's not captured here. Right, in terms of decomposition, now because most of the food falls into the stream, the organisms that feed on it would be mostly decomposers, fragmenting decomposers, like crabs, for example. And these are very specialist type of species because they must be able to survive in these very extreme conditions. So firstly, they must be able to survive in this fast current. So there are not a lot of species that can actually handle that type of fast current. So we're going to talk about that a bit later on as well. We also see that they must be specialized to deal with colder temperatures and that sort of thing. A lower pH, I haven't mentioned this, but you also have a lower pH in these high-lying streams. And this is also again because you don't have a lot of solutes in the water. In the Western Cape, it's even more acidic because of the type of rock that we have here, but also because of the fynbos vegetation that we have, because as fynbos decomposes, it creates acidic compounds, which acidifies the soil and also acidifies the water. So we have a lot more acidic upper reaches or headwater streams. And so we have to have very specific type of species that can survive here. So it is mostly just animals that can fragment, that, for example, those leaves. Imagine a few leaves fall into the water, something must be able to cut it up into pieces, like a crab, for example, or an insect larva or something like that. In terms of mineralization, releasing of nutrients, there's not a lot happening because microorganisms, this is not the ideal environment for them. They need a very calm environment. They need, preferably for the organic matter, to be able to settle at the bottom of the river and for them to float very calmly on top of the river and be able to do the work. So there's not a lot here. There is some, but very little. So fragmentation is the main decomposition stage that happens here. Right, let us look at this page and just see if I've covered everything. I think I have. There's the word allochthonous, and just maybe I can just mention here that this part of the river doesn't support a lot of food chains or a huge amount of diverse food chains, and this is because of the lack of photosynthesis in the river and the incomplete decomposition, and also the low species diversity, because those species that are here, they are very, very specialized, and therefore you can't find a lot of them. The other thing that I haven't mentioned is these less free nutrients in this part of the river, and that is because you don't have a lot of mineralization, as I mentioned, and whatever nutrients there are would obviously be washed down quite easily. Now we're going to move to the middle reaches. Now you can see from these photos it looks different. First thing that you can see is the streams are wider, and this is because you are now, if you think about it, you are now at the foothills and at the bottom of the mountains, and now traveling down into slightly more low-lying areas. So there is still a gradient, don't get me wrong, there is still definitely a gradient, and water still flows reasonably fast, but not nearly as fast as in the upper reaches. Because because it's wider, of course, because it has now collected water from all those different, um, all those many different streams, first order, second order, third order streams. The water is also slightly warmer because that water has now had quite a time to travel down to this section, so it's been exposed to sunlight. And if you look at the structure of the streams and the bottom of the stream, you'll see a lot more areas that are pools, and other areas where it looks like there are rapids because there's still rock. We call those rapids riffles, riffles, and these big ones we call pools. They don't have to be big like that. It can be just a small little pool and a small riffle. It just depends on that particular stream. But the point is, you now have two types of riverbed, and this creates a variety of microhabitats for species. So you have species that may prefer rocks and living under rocks, like crabs, for example, that you're going to find in the rocky parts where the riffles are, and species that are more specialized for faster flowing water. You're also going to find now these pools where the bottom is more muddy, with maybe a few rocks, where you're going to get species that prefer more muddy environments and calmer environments. And what did I say earlier? What prefers calmer environments? Microorganisms that are involved in mineralization, microflora. So you can also now expect quite a bit more mineralization. There's still going to be quite a lot of fragmentation as well, but also quite a bit of mineralization. So there's a nice balance between the two in this part of the river. So there's in terms of decomposition, quite a nice variety. There's also a big variety, as I said, in species. The species diversity is high here, and that is because of the different types of microhabitats which are offered here because of all the different types of riverbed structure and some other aspects as well. Now, in terms of photosynthesis, this part of the river has got the most photosynthesis of all the parts of the river. And this is, again, because of variety. So if you can remember the word variety, when it comes to the middle reaches, variety in decomposers, variety in photosynthesizers or producers, variety in riverbed structure. Everything works together to make this a part of the river which can sustain itself and which can actually generate its own food, capture its own energy, and actually function a lot better than the others in terms of supporting food chains and food webs. So if we go to photosynthesis, what you're first going to see is what you didn't see before, is vegetation in the water. So and these are called marginal vegetation or macrophytes. I prefer that you remember the word macrophytes. And macrophytes are divided into aquatic and semi-aquatic vegetation. The aquatic vegetation are floating plants that float in the water. They don't have roots, so they just float with the water, but they are mostly found here in the pools, and very often very close to the riverbank. Then you also have, rooted in the sediment, the semi-aquatic vegetation, like for example reeds and sedges, etc., where the roots are in the sediment and the tops of the plants stick out of the water. And so this is seen as part of the river system, whereas a tree on the bank of the river is not seen as part of the river. It's seen as what we call riparian vegetation, but it is not part of the actual river vegetation inside. It's not the macrophytes inside the river. And these plants, of course, they can capture their own energy, and so that means that this part of the river can capture its own energy and can actually generate its own food, its own and circulate its own nutrients, and because of that it is called an autochthonous system. Auto is in autotrophs. Now, apart from the plants, there are also a lot of microorganisms that also photosynthesize. So again, variety. So the microorganisms that you find here are blue-green algae in the water and diatoms. You can go and read up a bit on what diatoms are if you haven't learned about them before. We have two names for them. If they are drifting in the water, all of these microorganisms, then they are called phytoplankton. And if they are attached to rocks, they are called periphyton. The names are mentioned on the slide: periphyton and phytoplankton. And there's the word macrophytes for the plants. There's the word autochthonous, which means that the energy sources come from within the system. So they capture their own energy. Okay. I have mentioned most of what's on this page. Let me just quickly see. This one I haven't mentioned. That, of course, in reality, this, very few of our rivers, if any, are seen as natural anymore. So, unfortunately, we do have pollutants in our middle reaches. We already pick it up in our middle reaches because the type of land use practices or human activities that you find around middle reaches of a river are very often your agriculture, your farms, and maybe small towns. But the small towns, the towns and cities are usually located more towards the lower reaches of a river. And then again, greatest diversity, remember, in terms of riverbed structure, in terms of producers and consumers, and many food chains and food webs that can be sustained and supported.